Welcome to the Midnightology podcast, a place where we discuss macabre history, chilling bestiary, horrifying urban legends, visitors from outside our realm, and disturbing things that should only be mentioned during the midnight hours. Tonight, we have with us Cameron Nigh and Charlotte Kennedy. And they took kind of a special trip here in, when was it?
2017 in the summer.
2017 in the summer. And they're going to share a little bit about that trip with us tonight. I think you're all going to enjoy it. It's worth tuning in. First, we'll give a little background about our guests. Cameron, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, let's see. Born and raised in McMinnville, Oregon. Spent my early childhood chasing Bigfoot in the hills outside of McMinnville, or something that at least sounded like Bigfoot, but could have been a raccoon for all I know. Always been fascinated with monsters and things like that, and then eventually went down to California to study filmmaking, and ended up back here after being down in Los Angeles for 22 years.
Oh, wow. So that kind of gives you a unique perspective on somebody that might be trying to fake the footage a little.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I know what can be done with film. So.
Okay. And Charlotte, how about yourself?
Well, I have some of the same background as Cameron in growing up here in Tigard, then moving down to Los Angeles for about 18 years, and then moving back up here about 18 years ago. And then meeting Cameron and being introduced pretty much at that time to the whole Bigfoot, what's going on out there world.
So it was kind of an introduction from Cameron.
Yes, pretty much.
And in the meantime, you guys have spent how much time out? Kind of running around?
Well, we've gone out quite a few times, but we actually started our honeymoon after we got married was Bigfooting in the Washington Gifford Pinchot National Forest in an area called Skookum Meadow, where supposedly we'd done some research. That was one of the high Bigfoot areas there. And
a history of Bigfoot sightings back to Indians, right?
Yeah, and we had found, while we were there, we didn't see anything, but we did hear some strange things at night. We found one footprint that we got a good picture of, and there were a large number of tree breaks along some of the pathways and stuff like that were probably about 8 feet up on saplings that had been broken over and all pointing in the same direction.
Okay. So how long had you been, Bigfooting or whatever prior to your trip cross country?
Well, I've been, like I said, doing it for my whole life. Growing up in McMinnville, my best friend lived in the hills outside of McMinnville. And not only did he believe Bigfoot was around his house, but he believed he was personally out to get him. So he was a little paranoid and stuff, and hanging out with him, it just kind of followed. You'd hear anything, and pretty soon you were sure you were about to be attacked by a monster. But as I got older and I became more fascinated with all sorts of different monster legends or cryptozoology, I had a little more sane look at it, and it became more of a hobby to actually just go out and investigate things and see for myself.
Okay. Well, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Thanks again for listening to the Midnightology podcast. Please excuse the audio tonight. We're still working out some of the kinks with our audio setup, but we still think you'll enjoy the content. Remember, you can find updates on our Facebook and Twitter feeds, and our website is midnightology.com. If you've had an encounter, just to have an interesting story, please drop us a line at midnightology@gmail.com. Okay, folks, we're back. So now we get to hear a little bit about this cross-country trip. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that all coalesced?
Well, my last living relative is an aunt who lives in Florida, and haven't seen her for years and years, and I figured I better go see her before it's too late. So that was the ultimate purpose and goal of the trip, was to drive across the country to Florida to visit my aunt. And we figured for a long trip we needed a theme.
Something to keep to make the trip interesting as we were going there.
Kind of like Alien Highway.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
So I got online and did some research, and I found 6 various towns that we were going to hit along the way that had either monster legends or were well known in the Bigfoot world for places where Sasquatch was sighted. And so we just picked those 6 towns, and instead of her aunt, we planned the trip around those 6 places and just moved from place to place, spending a day or so in each place, doing investigation and talking with people along the way. Oh,
And the cheesy museums along the way.
yeah.
Had to pick up souvenirs.
Well, that kind of goes without saying.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to a place that's either haunted or has a Bigfoot, there's going to be a museum.
Yes, we got to see the world's only Mothman museum. That was quite an experience, because Mothman was actually one of the first creatures other than Bigfoot that I became interested in. I remembered reading an article in the National Enquirer when I was about 12 or something like that. So that had been kind of like a lifelong dream, was to get to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where this weird winged creature had been seen.
Okay. So did you decide on a specific time of year, or that was just because of the trip to see your aunt? I mean,
Yeah, it wasn't a specific time of year. It was in August, I think, that we went, just because that was,
We figured it would be
Time
good to
we
go in
had
the
off.
hottest, humidest part of the
for hitting Florida.
for hitting Florida. Yeah.
and where was your first stop?
The first stop that we actually had planned was in a little town called Van Meter, Iowa. And it had taken us a couple days to get there, but this was the first place we had stopped. They had a legend called the Van Meter Monster. And what it basically was like almost like a pterodactyl that had supposedly come out of this mine near Van Meter back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, that for about 5 days had been seen by very notable people in the town, not, bums or something, but like bankers and doctors and things like that. And it had terrorized the community for those few days, and then apparently went back in the mine and had never been seen again. But it hit enough in the newspapers that like a cryptozoologist in the 70s had discovered it and written a book about it and turned it into kind of a place to go. Even though the monster had not been sighted since then, it was still interesting because of the history of it and the unusualness of the monster, and the fact that the mines were still there, so it'd be a place to go scare ourselves.
And so how did that make your list? What was the criteria for this list?
We were trying to find unusual monsters as well as some of the more famous ones. So this one, we were going to be going through Iowa anyway, and there wasn't a whole lot monster-wise in like Nebraska or Kansas or something like that. So we thought, well, we need to start somewhere. Let's pick this one, and we'll just spend a day there and see what we can see.
So the Flatlanders don't have a lot of monsters running around.
Not too many.
No
yeah.
place for the monsters
no place
to
for 'em to
hide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I just posted a video, I think it was in Ohio, a guy had some angry Sasquatch sounds behind his house.
Well,
so
that was one of our stops too.
Yeah, we did stop in Ohio, but it's funny because, coming out of Oregon, you're in trees, and then you hit the desert, and it was pretty much just flat and brown until we got to Ohio, and then it started to have more hills and green and trees. So there's plenty of places to hide in Ohio.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Okay, so did you guys pack any specific equipment when you went? I mean, with this in mind, or
We had just a few minor things. We did have a plaster of Paris kit in case we found a footprint or something, camera, of course, and then we did carry with us a night vision so that we could look around in some of the places at night and see what might be lurking behind the trees.
And did you happen to run into any other groups? I mean, while you're...
We didn't
I
run
don't
into
think
any
we did.
groups, but in every town, the locals were always either willing to tell us a story or point us in the right direction of where to go. As a matter of fact, we happened to go through Van Meter on a Sunday. And so we thought, well, let's start the day. We'll go to a local church and just see what's that. And so we were in this church and we're kind of, just listening to what's going on. And the people asked, oh, what brings you to Van Meter?
Well,
And we said, well, the monster. And they were like, oh, you just missed our pastor. They were switching pastors. And apparently the pastor that we had just missed was like a big Van Meter monster fan. And he would make them participate. Knew all about it, would make them participate in the parade every year and stuff like that. So we were able to get a little bit of information about it.
That's kind of interesting. It's kind of like is this the Church of the Van Meter Monster?
You would have thought, yeah.
So what was your next stop?
Well, before then, I do have to say we actually did get something that nobody has gotten since these sightings. And that is an actual photograph of a Van Meter monster.
Really?
Yes. Failing at our attempt to find him in the mine, we went to the local 7-Eleven and got a Monster energy drink and took a picture of it in front of the Van Meter sign. So it clearly says the Van Meter monster on it.
That might be a new marketing strategy for the monster folks.
Right.
And then next
Next was Ohio.
Yeah, that was where we went into Ohio to Salt Fork State Park, which is known for the Ohio Grassman, which is just their version of Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was the plan in Ohio for the Grassman?
We just went right into the Salt Fork State Park, found ourselves a place to camp, and waited till dark, and then tramped around in the woods. Found a really nice lake and a couple of Bigfoot crossing signs, but didn't get to see anything that we were hoping to see.
Well, considering we had our trusty coonhound with us, scaring away anything that might have been out there anyway.
And did you go with the mind of skeptics, or... I mean, there's people who classify themselves as true believers, I mean, they believe pretty much everything. And then there's people that go with the mind towards, well, I'm not sure. I don't know if this exists, but if it does, I'd like to experience it.
I think it was with the mind of, oh, this is going to be fun. Let's just see what's really out there, and let's see if we can find other people to talk to who know about the legends, who are really into it, and what kind of souvenirs can we find along the way. Just show that we've been there. But I think it was mostly just for fun, just to see, for adventure.
Yeah,
what's out there.
It's not the finding, it's the looking, I guess, is the attitude there. But I probably have been both. When I was much younger, like I said, in 12, 13 or something like that, I was a true believer. It had, had to be out there and after me and stuff like that. And there again, as growing up, I'd like to think they're out there, but I look with a skeptical eye as well. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm also hopefully not going to be fooled.
Right. So something you said was really interesting to me, too, that basically every town you went into, there was somebody with a story.
Oh, yeah. Even at Salt Fork State Park, they had the tourist area, the camp store had tons of books on the Grassman,
coffee
cups,
mugs, refrigerator magnets.
And what are those things with like the sport pennants, Grassman pennants and stuff like that. But the ranger was, had a story or two to say, well, so-and-so, reported it up on this ridge. And there was one place where apparently it had been sighted like 2 weeks or something before we got there. But it was so far up in the thing, we just didn't have time because ultimately we did want to see her aunt.
We were on a time limit.
We were on a time limit, so we didn't have time to go out that far, which would have been nice. But we did get to hike in the Salt Fork State Park at night, which is a little unnerving.
Yeah. So how long did you stay there?
Just that night.
One night.
Yeah.
Now, the people that you did speak to, did they seem very credible, or are they retelling stories, or did they
A little bit of both.
a little bit of
Yeah.
So there's some marketing going
Yeah,
on, but
there-
also
There are clearly some people that are having fun with it. But then there were others who seemed very sincere, either with a story that they had seen something or knew somebody who did and believed their friend or something like that.
and so after you left Ohio, where was the next stop?
Now, that was the Holy Grail. The next stop was Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the Mothman. And so we did stay a couple days there because if you're going to travel across country for a childhood dream, you might as well make a couple days of it.
Sure.
And Point Pleasant was everything I'd hoped it would be. It was this small town, old brick buildings and things like that. But right in the middle of the town, they have this huge statue dedicated to the Mothman. So they've got this great, I don't know what it was made out of, bronze or something, but a huge Mothman statue right next door to the world's only Mothman museum. And that was probably the definition of cheese.
Well, I mean, Point Place is going to make what they can out of it. I mean, they did have a tragedy there, too.
Yes, they did.
So,
Yeah. And they not played up, that's probably the wrong word, but they did mention the tragedy. They did have.
They had old newspaper articles from that time period, right?
Pieces of the bridge and explanations as to what happened, as well as pointing out that there were a number of people that thought the Mothman was responsible. So they kind of took both what probably happened structurally, as well as the people who thought it was because of.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is your childhood holy grail, but isn't there also a story of Men in Black visiting just prior to this?
Or during, actually, yeah. It was, it had everything. That's, I think, what made it so great is it had UFOs that were seen. It had Men in Black that were visiting people, strange noises on telephones in the middle of the night, doppelgangers or, people who look like other people visiting at 2 or 3 in the morning. And then, of course, a large 8 to 9 foot tall monster with red eyes and wings. Yeah.
Right. As the topper.
Yeah, that was the big one.
So generally the people you talked to in Point Pleasant, I mean, did you have to go around like knocking on doors? Hey, tell me your story. Or was it just, how did that all
No, really
come about?
We'd go into a bookstore or something like that, and then we just happen to mention it to the lady, and she'd either have a pro or a negative. People in both. Some are tired of it, others, enjoy it. It's a way of bringing people into the town and stuff like that. So we just kind of play it by ear. We didn't really go door to door, but where you go out to eat, or you'd, like I said, go shopping, or when we were at the whole trip, we didn't stay in motels. We camped in the back of our pickup. We put like a little mattress back there and, something to heat water for coffee and freeze-dried food and stuff like that. So very often we would stay in RV parks because you can, since we don't have a hookup, we could pay, tent camping prices at like $10 a night, but still get use of their shower and bathroom facilities. So it was a perfect place. But that's, it's a trailer park, so that's prone to having people who are living there and, know the area or something and want to, sit by the campfire at the night and tell stories and chit-chat. So, so that was really a perfect venue for trying to discover these places.
At Point Pleasant, actually see actual sites.
Right. The gentleman who runs the museum gave us directions to this munitions dump called the TNT area, where they had stored munitions during World War II and where the majority of the sightings were. And these were great places because you'd go out on this back road, and we had to move, and he told us we had to, like a blockade that they had put up. So we just had to lift it up and kind of move it to get our truck through there. But you'd go down this road. On the left side of us was this huge lake covered in lily pads and all sorts of animal noises that you really don't hear on the West Coast. And then on the right, it looked like it was just the jungle, really, on the right side of the road. But if you'd look every once in a while, you'd look in there and you'd see something that was darker than dark. And that was the door to these munitions things.
Open doorway.
Right, an open doorway.
Into the dome bunkers.
Yeah, it was like a dome bunker that was maybe 20, 30 feet high. That was covered over with moss, or not moss, ivy and things like that,
Vines
and the vines and trees.
Completely covered. You couldn't see any of it, but the black doorway.
And so you could pull open the metal door and walk in, and it would, be this huge dome, echoey, and some graffiti on the wall. The Mothman was here, kind of graffiti and stuff like that. But very dark and foreboding at night. And that was probably one of the spookier times. Was we went out there during the day to kind of case it out and look at it, but we went back at night after maybe 11 o'clock. And we were the only ones out there, of course, and we are just trying to get out and have our flashlights, and we're going. And there was about 2 seconds when a bat flew by Charlotte's head, and she ended up kind of on my shoulders. That for one brief moment we thought, yes, the Mothman is after us. He's here and he's real.
It fit right in with, there were so many strange noises out there in the dark, just pitch black, with that giant pond that was right next to us that had animal noises that we don't hear out here.
Yeah, the only thing that would have made it perfect would have been if it had been foggy.
Right. So did you camp there that night, or?
We stayed out there for a while, but we didn't sleep there. We decided it was probably more propitious to go back to the RV place and finish the night out there. But we were probably there for a good 3 hours. So just kind of walking around, waiting, listening, checking out bunker after bunker.
And I would think at some point, I mean, you're also thinking people can be a danger too. I mean, who else is wandering around in the dark?
Because it really was out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody around, no buildings, no light, no sound.
So that almost means too that somebody who saw something, the chances of being hoaxed might be, I don't know.
Possible. And also the museum owner or operator did kind of intimate that every once in a while the police kind of went out there and checked too. So we kind of didn't want to sleep there and get rousted in the middle of the night or something like that. Because they do have problems with vandals and stuff going in with the tagging the walls.
Right. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
The people might be a danger too. You never know. So you stayed there a couple of days.
Yeah.
I mean, anything else? Yeah.
Well, we also tried during the trip to just explore some of the history of the area. So one of the things that we did periodically when we could was visit some of the old cemeteries. We figure on the East Coast we're going to hit some really good cemeteries with some old tombstones. And as a matter of fact, we found one. I think this was back in Van Meter, though. We found one where the gentleman had lived 100 years. He was born in like 1785 and died in 1885. So,
wow.
So even that long ago, he lived to be 100 years.
Yeah. Well, and that's, Chris's favorite thing is cemeteries. And I'm always amazed at the stories sometimes you find printed on the stone.
Yep. And what was interesting about the Point Pleasant cemetery was it was literally right in the center of town. We were just driving on the main street and then turned to our right, and there was this cemetery right there.
On the other side of the sidewalk.
It was like
there's the
if
cemetery.
you were walking by on the sidewalk, you could reach out and touch the headstones. So.
Makes you wonder if you could do a little research in the planning and the history of the town, because a lot of cemeteries were on the outskirts of town at some point,
right?
And then the town kind of grows past the boundary. Interesting. So where did you go next?
After Mothman, we went to South Carolina for the Lizardman.
Lizardman.
What's the Lizardman?
In the 80s, there was these sightings of a lizard-like humanoid creature that came out of the Scape Ore Swamp and terrorized some of the locals in Bishopville, South Carolina. And we were, we looked online, and there was the Lizardman Museum. So we thought, well, we've got to go see that.
Mhm.
So we found out that it wasn't really the Lizardman Museum; it was the Cotton Museum.
With a corner
Really?
dedicated to the lizard.
Yes,
man.
it was one. It was one. Yeah, glass case, maybe 5 feet long, with some Lizardman stuff in it. One footprint, a couple of newspaper articles, and some Lizardman T-shirts.
That
But
was about it.
we did learn more about cotton than anyone would ever want to know.
Oh, okay.
And the curator of the museum was a man who genuinely loved cotton. He was very excited and willing to tell us everything.
Was the lizard man wearing a cotton T-shirt?
I believe he was, actually. Yes.
There was also a small bookstore section off to the side of this, and with some interesting cookbooks where we learned how the best recipe for raccoon and possum.
What?
So we had to pick that up. Yeah.
It just seems like an interesting marketing choice. I mean, the guy's running a cotton museum, but you're finding him as the proprietor of the Lizard Man Museum.
This was definitely a gentleman who would fall in the category of I'm only doing this because my bosses expect me to. He was not thrilled with the whole Lizard Man story or that his town was well known for that.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
It's kind of like, in the 80s, there was always the urban legend of somebody had a pet crocodile or whatever, and they flushed it down the toilet. So
They grew up in
Right.
yeah,
Sure.
so maybe that was the birth of the Lizard Man.
It could be to me, I really liked the Lizard Man because I've always been drawn to the more the spookier, possibly going to get eaten kind of a creature. But there really wasn't a whole lot there. They did point us to the Scape Ore Swamp where it was seen, and we hung around there for a little while. Didn't really, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. So we're like, well, it's time to move on.
Yeah.
So we went on there, and we did learn that it's called the Scape Ore Swamp, but it was really in the old days called the Scape, rhymes with ore and refers to ladies of the evening who plied their trade out there. So they changed the name to Scape Ore Swamp.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's the best part of taking these trips, because if you hadn't gone, you wouldn't have that little bit of history. And so, what could beat the Lizard Man? What was?
Well, we ended up just stopping. This was actually kind of an unplanned thing. Unfortunately, my wife can't verify it for anybody. But we stopped in it was either, I can't remember now if it was either this side on the North Carolina or South Carolina side or right over into Georgia. But we figured we'd gone far enough. So we stopped for the night in a park, just found a park. And we were sitting around the campfire, and I just was kind of looking up through the trees, and I saw 3 lights in a triangle shape that looked like they were moving quietly with no sound or anything, and they were all white. There weren't any blinking lights, and it looked exactly to me like something you would see in the X-Files when occasionally they'd look up and it would be like the triangle would be moving.
Right.
And so it took a second for my mind to go, wait a minute, that's not right. So I just got up and yelled for Charlotte, and I started running, trying to find it, and I lost it and never saw it again. So
There was so many trees.
there were so many trees,
blocking
yeah.
the whole sky.
So what it was, who knows? It was a UFO in the sense that it was flying, it was an object, and I can't identify it. But that's as far as I can go.
Well, I mean, that's the definition of UFO.
Yeah. So but I have no idea. But it had an unusual look to it that made my brain go, that's not right.
Huh.
But yeah, that was unplanned. We weren't there for UFOs that time. We were there for monsters.
So that implies just another trip in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what would you do next? I mean, I don't know.
Well, we'd like to do the same thing. There's a cryptozoology museum in Portland, Maine, and we're near Portland, Oregon. As we want to do a trip like we did from Portland to Portland, hitting some of the northern states and their monsters, like the Beast of Bray Road, the Dog Man, the Jersey Devil, those kinds of things, and get to see a cheesy museum.
Well, sure. I mean, and you can even start your trip in, I think it's Beaverton. Isn't that where Cliff from
the Bigfoot, Finding Bigfoot?
Finding Bigfoot has his museum now.
Yeah. Oh, does he have one there? Oh, you're
I
right.
think
Museum
so.
to
I think they
museum.
opened a museum.
Oh.
And I think it's in Beaverton. I mean, don't quote me on
Well,
that,
definitely,
but
though. We'd have to go from museum to museum.
yeah, I mean, that would be the way to do it. That you've got a start in Portland, Oregon, and an end in Portland, Maine. And how long do you plan on setting aside for this trip?
We're hoping at least 3 weeks
Yeah.
is really what the minimum to drive that distance. Spend at least a day or two at each of your pre-planned stopping spots.
Yeah. 4 would probably be better. And this time we wouldn't have to set aside time for a relative.
Right.
So we'd be able to spend a little more time in some of the places than we did.
So what are you going to do differently for this trip? I mean, now that you've already taken a cross-country trip to see some, what would you plan differently?
We've talked often about we wish we had more time at each of the stops that we made at the 6 monster stops at our last trip. We wish that we could have spent at least 1 to 2 more days at each stop.
Gotten to talk to more people, gotten to spend more time, a couple nights in a row out in the woods investigating, or and where we could actually stay there, park the truck and stay.
So was on this last trip, was there quite a bit of internet research before you went?
A little bit, yeah, which were the best areas and stuff. The last 2 that we went to were both Bigfoot related, and they were very popular. The Florida, since we were in Florida visiting, the Skunk Ape down in the Everglades. And then we decided, well, we've got to do what we can to get to Fouke, Arkansas, and the Legend of Boggy Creek, which actually turned out to be the best of the places.
Oh, well, and I skipped right over
They're
that when I
really
questioned it.
playing
So
it up there,
yeah,
too.
and I was raised on that film.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
that was great. That was a great one too.
Scared me as a kid.
Before that, we did do the Skunk Ape, and we got to stay in the Florida Everglades at the Skunk Ape Research Center and RV Park, and so it was kind of an all-encompassing thing. We didn't see any skunk apes, 1 alligator, some exotic animals in a museum, and more than enough mosquitoes to cover
To last a lifetime.
the population of Oregon.
Those were the monsters you saw.
Those were the
right?
monsters
Yeah.
that we saw. Actually, we were in the back of our truck. We had mosquito netting, but we were both getting eaten. Even the dog was getting eaten alive. So we ended up sitting up in the front of the truck where we could close the windows and turn on the air conditioner. So
Wow.
yeah.
So just so we can skip back a bit, because I'm sure there's people listening that don't know when we say Fouke, Arkansas, we're talking. So why don't you tell the uninitiated about why that's important?
It's this little town in Arkansas that was in the 70s the setting for a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. And it was about this period of time where this Bigfoot-like monster that was, here again, my favorite, a little more on the violent side, attacked a few small families in their cabins and terrorized a few of the locals and stuff, and was a very successful cheesy drive-in movie that gained quite a big popularity in the early 70s.
My understanding is that a lot of people, at least, generational residents living, still remember some of these stories directly. Did you experience any of that?
Well,
I mean,
you were going to say?
Well, we stopped for lunch at this tiny little cafe that had, what was that? The Bigfoot.
No, it was the Monster Melt. It was a patty melt, a big patty melt. So it was the Monster Melt.
So you couldn't
Because you
pass that
have
up.
to order that.
Right.
Yeah,
So we're overhearing a couple local people who were in there, overhearing them talk, and they're listening to us talk about looking for the monster. And so we struck up a conversation, and this old guy that was in there that was he was just what we were looking for. The type that says, "Oh yeah, I remember," and it was seen out on my property Boggy Creek goes right through, and he said, if you want to go on down to my property, you just take this road down and go past 3 houses and turn left and over the big hill and then down and then to the right, and you can't miss it.
Yeah, he didn't give us any streets names. He just 3 houses, make a left, go past the red brick, and so, and it's a miracle we actually found it.
And this is Bob's Road.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So we found Boggy Creek, and we went out there and traipsed around, and this would have been one of the best things. But by the time we got to Fouke,
this was our last.
It was our last monster, and we had to get back home to work. So we couldn't stay but this guy was literally like, you can camp on my property, you can stay as long as you want. So that would be the place to go and get back to that property, get the permission from him, and then stay out there for 3 or 4 days and just be able to see it at night. Because it was a very creepy, wooded, small creek running through, mossy trees and brush and stuff like that.
that would almost be worth a return trip just for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we've talked about, is doing that sometime, just going and hitting Fouke, Arkansas, or,
So in that conversation, did anybody say, oh, yeah, just the other day?
That's what I was going to say. We ran into, there was the one lady who said she saw the monster. And then there was a pause, and she goes, I married him.
Oh,
Yeah. But there were other people that had seen it recently, within the last year or so. And so that's a place, unlike Van Meter or something, where there are still sightings of the creature. So for whatever that's worth, that would make it more worthwhile to be out there for a couple days. In Van Meter, it was interesting, and it was good to see the history and the stories. But if it hadn't been seen since the early 1900s, chances are likely there's nothing there
Right.
now.
well, and what catches my interest is that, the span of time. I mean, we're talking about when the movie was made in the 70s,
Right.
and there's a lot of technological changes from then to now.
Uh-huh.
I mean, so is the setting, does it still seem quite as rural as was depicted in the film? Or-
Not quite as, but it's a pretty small area. I mean, it's a small town. There's a lot of space between the towns. When we were there, they have their cheesy museum too.
Right.
And they've got what's called the Monster Mart, and it's just a convenience store / diner with a huge plaster Bigfoot, holding his hands over the door, so you have to walk through him to get in, and selling the coffee mugs. I think we
Right.
bought 2 there. That was a really good place. Anyway, but even there, there were people who had seen it. They could point you to areas, and they were interested in it. There was one guy there that said also, you might, if you're driving home, there have been about 5 or 6 sightings in this forest in Oklahoma, which was just, a little to the west and north, but easily within the day's drive. So we kind of thought about going through there, and we would have, had we not been pressed for time. So we drove through the area, but it was, mostly like driving through a Oregon park, just kind of looking, hoping that you'd see something as you're driving. But he was pointing us to area in that general area where things were still seen.
Well, and it's interesting because I think these things are almost generally accepted easier now. I mean, in the 70s, if you said you saw a big hairy man and he attacked me or screamed or whatever, a lot of people think you're a crackpot. And it's become more acceptable now to, I guess, voice it if you do see something.
Yeah, I think with all the TV shows and things that have kind of made it more of a popular mainstream idea, that it is easier to get people to talk.
Well, in the marketing aspect, I mean, I see that as the dangerous flip side of that. I mean, people realize that there's a lot of people watching Finding Bigfoot and whatever. So, that's where you get the cheesy museums and the marketing. The Cotton Museum with the Lizardman in the case in the corner.
Right, yeah.
So, I guess that's why I was so fascinated about when you said you stopped at Fouke, because it's a kind of a dual thing going on. I mean, a lot of people were not happy about that coming out in the 70s.
Right. There, and I would say I think you hit on it. And thinking about it, it was all the Bigfoot or Bigfoot type creatures that the Ohio grassman, the skunk ape, and falk that were places where people were still seeing things. You know, you might get somebody once in a while to claim they've seen the Mothman, but there's no real, not like it was in the 60s when it was
Right.
hundreds of sightings within a few month period of time, or the Lizardman, number of sightings in the 80s, or Van Meter in the 1800s. You know, those were more like, what was the word? You like a flap, a UFO,
Right.
You know, just a series of things. But the falk monster, yeah, still being seen by people who get freaked out by it once in a while.
Right. Well, and that's like the dog man, and there's been several cases where it seems like they come in a group. I remember it was in the news, the lady that had her car attacked by the dog man, ripped the fender off and all that, and she had the cops come out. That was on video, where the cops, they talked to her about that, and there was a whole bunch of sightings right around that incident. So I don't know. It seems interesting that you get that grouping.
Yeah, and it seems like you say, it seems to be the more, I don't want to say esoteric, but the more unusual monsters.
Yeah.
You know, there's almost something else that just creates a certain time that those are seen.
And yet Sasquatch, I mean, say this about the legend, it really hasn't died out. It started, you know, as soon as settlers came in and started talking to the Native Americans, hearing stories about, you know, their legends, and then it's continued clear through to today.
There's a certain part of me that would like to think there's a 9-foot creature with wings and red eyes, or a lizard man that's, you know, going to come up and scare you. But those are a little harder to take. But if any of them, of all the cryptozoological oddities out there, the one that does at least seem like it's plausible is I think the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch.
And I guess that's just for the same reason why aliens and UFOs, those stories don't die out.
Right.
It's so plausible.
Yeah. There's
There's always new stories that keep coming up. You keep hearing about the latest ones.
And it feeds into conspiracy theorists too. I mean, they propagate it because, well, our government is in cahoots with aliens, and they've got a spaceship. They've, you know, captured those crashed in Roswell and in Area 51 somewhere. I guess that'll be for another trip.
Right. Yeah.
So, in closing, I mean, what would be your advice to anybody else that wants to take this kind of a trip? What have you learned?
Just don't be afraid to ask people if they've seen something, or, you know.
That's the fun part, is to talk to people who live there and see what they've seen or heard, or where is it, because they want to talk about it.
Yeah, and to have fun with it. You know, if they laugh at it, laugh as well. Sure, you know, okay. Maybe it's not there, but it's fun to go out and look. Do you mind if we go on your property and look? You know, it's fun to get scared in the middle of the night and things like that.
Yeah, I just posted a thing on our website, Facebook. They did a study about how horror movies manipulate our brain, how it functions. So I guess that goes in hand to hand with going out Bigfoot hunting or looking for aliens. You're looking for that shock, I guess.
That's what
And you're looking for that one thing, maybe that one piece of evidence, or what you think is evidence, that's going to keep you coming back again. Like when we were up Bigfoot hunting in Washington, and we found a footprint that was a much bigger size than your foot.
clearly defined toes. Yeah.
A human print.
Now, whether it was fake or not, we don't know. But whatever it was we found, it whetted our appetite enough to make us want to go back.
Right.
And also, I was going to say, we took this night vision scope, and it's a poor man's night vision scope. It's a monocular, or a single lens, and to get it to operate, you have to squeeze it, and then when you look through it and you squeeze it, and that kind of operates the night vision part. And that was that was where the adrenaline would really get going, because you're out in the middle of the forest.
Mhm.
There's no moon. It's
black.
pitch dark. You put it up to your eye, and then you squeeze, and you can see, and you know that you're going to do that one time, and it's going to be right there. And you're thinking, and you're just right there, and you're
Right.
and that's going to be the end of it. You're going to scream and run like a little girl.
Or it'll be right behind
Right.
you. As you go, oh, there's nothing there. You turn around and.
Bump into it, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Charlotte and Cameron. And we're looking forward for that next trip.
Oh,
So
us
are
too.
we. Yeah.
So, and hopefully in the future, we're going to have Cameron join us to talk about cults. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. I've heard Cameron talk about the subject before, and he's got some unique insights. I don't know. Maybe he was a cult leader in the past. I don't know.
Could
but
be.
Past life.
I would
Think
think I would
about
have more
starting.
money than
Yeah. So, all right, folks, have a good night.